You're now watching the Mike Missanelli podcast on the BetRivers Network.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Mike Missanelli podcast on a Tuesday, February 6th. This is a landmark podcast, number 160. I love those even numbers, those square numbers. It's, of course, brought to you by BetRivers. Special podcast because we're going to have an interview with Jon Marks, who recently left his position as drive time host at WIP. Of course, John started with me, my first producer. When I came back to Philly, he worked for WPEN, which was an AM station that turned into an FM station. And so we'll go over the history of our association, where he became actually my opponent in Evening Drive after being my producer for many years. But let's start off with your 76ers. I have so many thoughts on this. First of all, Embiid got surgery today. Now, let me just tell you that this meniscus surgery is something that I've had. So I'm familiar with it. The meniscus is kind of a buffer inside. And when you have a little tear, the tear comes outside the capsule of the knee and it irritates the nerves. And so they have to go in, and what they do is they clip that tear off to make it even again. And that's what I thought he had. And they were saying that there would be something more serious than that. I didn't think it was anything more serious than that. It's just 4 to 6 week injury is what it is. Now, here's the thing about this. He can come back by the playoffs, I believe. Now, you'll be getting a lot more medical information that comes out about this surgery. I believe it's 6 weeks at most. But will the Sixers want him to come back? And this is the big issue. Because I'm thinking that the Sixers at this point might say, you know what? Next year is going to be a better year for us. We're going to have like $50 million in cap space. Why don't we just shut it down? Because in retro, we're probably not going to be good enough to win anyway. And here's the reason why. You can't win. This team can't win unless Embiid is at his best. And I think that we have seen that. And in a minute, I'm going to rip Daryl Morey because of this. So technically, he should be back for the playoff hunt. But A, how effective would he be? B, what kind of shape will he be in after being idle for 6 weeks? We've seen that picture before. C, if he comes back, even if he comes back, would that be a good enough team that could get past the second round and get to the Eastern Conference Finals and get to the NBA Finals? I think that maybe 3% of the people would believe that they would be good enough to do that. So the Sixers, I think, management, coaching staff, deep down inside knows that that's probably not going to happen, and they're better off to pass it off to next year. The trade deadline is coming up in a couple of days. The Sixers have to make a value judgment here because they can move Tobias Harris. If they move Tobias Harris, they are telling the fan base that we're done for the season. But he's going to walk at the end of the year, and you're going to get nothing for him anyway, except that excess cap space. So the wheels are turning with the Sixers right now. And if you're going to ask me, I go, they're not good enough anyway. Why wouldn't I trade Tobias Harris and let my fans have to bite another bullet? Or they might say, these fans have bitten enough bullets. Let's con them into thinking that we can make a run at this, and we'll keep Tobias, and we'll wait for Embiid to come back. I don't know how it's going to turn out. But here's what I know about the Sixers and Daryl Morey. They're not good enough. And why aren't they good enough? Because in retrospect, Daryl Morey, while everybody was saying he made his team deeper on the bench, didn't really make his team deeper. Why? Because he loaded up on pieces that don't make a difference. Older, broken down role players that you can see now don't make a difference. Look at this team. The veteran depth on this team can't play more than 3 games without getting injured. Let's just go through the list. Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, Melton, Batum. These guys are injured every other week. These are older players now. They've got a lot of mileage on the odometer. They're in their 30s now. What do you expect to get from these guys? They have guys like Danuel House. Come on, man. What kind of difference is Danuel House going to make? Jaden Springer, this kid they've been talking about for 4 years. He can't play. Well, he's going to be a good defensive player. Well, that's what you had in Thibault. And it wasn't good enough because he couldn't make a basket. So what good is Jaden Springer? It's been 4 years now. Patrick Beverly, come on. I mean, listen, okay, he has some moments. He's been passed around the league like sweat socks. And Kelly Oubre, he started off really well, right? He conned people into thinking, but he's not a winning player. All these guys that you look at have not come from winning teams. Paul Reed, what do you see in Paul Reed? Mo Bamba, what do you see in him? KJ Martin, and there's still Korkmaz on that bench. These are veteran players that you look at and go, wow, yeah, they look a little deeper, but they don't make any kind of a difference. And this is why the front office is the front office. You have to anticipate, instead of just tacking on players, you have to anticipate what pieces will fit and what benefit that they will give your team. It's easy to go out and say, well, I just got Marcus Morris. He's a good veteran. I just got Covington and Melton and House and Patrick Beverly. But what difference do they make? They don't. So in the aggregate, are we going to sit here and say, geez, if Embiid comes back, he's going to make this team good enough to win in the playoffs? And I just don't see it. I'm sorry. And as bad as it is to put the fan base through another gap year, to me, that's the only solution. And I would not be shocked if they milk this Embiid injury out for a really long period of time, and then they say, well, you know what, we just decided he can't go, and we'd rather have him healthy for next year because we have great prospects for next year. We can do some things next year. Now, where does that put Tobias Harris? I don't know. That means Tobias Harris is probably going to have to stay because you're not going to make that decision on Embiid right now. You're going to have to milk that out for several weeks. So you can't tell your fan base now that you're punting. You got to say, yeah, maybe come back, and Tobias Harris is still going to be here. And then in the end, the fan base is going to say, or they're going to say to the fan base, you know what, it just didn't work out. And they do that a lot. They take the liberties with the fan base all the time that way. Darren, you just heard my soliloquy on the Sixers, and I ripped Daryl Morey. Yes, I did. Because Daryl Morey has not made a big enough difference as the general manager of this team. He and Elton Brand have to share the responsibility for these constant failures to the point where you're going to have a great player and you're not going to be able to build enough around him to win something with that great player. And that's the reality of it.
How much can this fan base take? I mean, really. I root for the Sixers. I'm not a diehard hoop head like I am with the Eagles or the Phillies, but I feel bad for the diehard Sixer fans. Talking about another gap year, you know, they got to redo the bench again because you're right, they're all old. Like, Morey you're ripping Morey, and that's good. I don't think he's gotten half the heat that he should. I mean, honestly, he hasn't really made any great moves.
The thing about him, he buys time. Because at the beginning of this year, I was skeptical of it. Believe me, I've followed the NBA for a really long time. You don't load up on older players and expect they're going to make a difference for you. Yeah, the names look better than what you've had in the past. Right? You look at it now, Covington. Covington hasn't played well in this league for 3 years. He's broken down. Marcus Morris has been with 74 teams. What is he going to do for you? Patrick Beverly. What are these guys actually going to do for you? Well, on paper, it looks like, wow, man, it's better than what we had, but it really isn't. So the only thing that stops me here is that early in the season, they were playing well together when they had Embiid and Maxey and the whole bit. And it's fallen off a cliff at this point. Last night, Dallas, Luka Doncic didn't even want to play last night. He took 15 shots. Kyrie didn't even want to play. You know why? Because they played the Nets tonight. and Kyrie's going back to Brooklyn, and so they're saving all their energy for this game, and they beat that Sixer team half-ass last night. By the way, I took the Mavericks on the money line on the BetRivers app, so there you go.
Yeah, 6 losses in a row, and their next week or two doesn't look very easy either.
All right, let's move on from the Sixers. I got that off my chest. Listen, if you don't agree, that's fine. You can email me, Mike@MikeMiss.com. I look at the reality of situations instead of getting involved in fandom. I mean, there are people out there that are saying, well, look, they got some depth. I mean, Reed, look at Reed. Reed's not promising. Paul Reed doesn't know how to play. Still doesn't know how to play. Mo Bamba, they got a 7'1" guy. I don't understand what he thinks the NBA is. He came into the league and everybody had some high hopes for him. He doesn't play. He doesn't play hard. Like, what is he? What is Patrick Beverley at this point? I mean, it gets me ill. All right, let's move on. The Eagles. It been announced that they will open their season on a Friday night in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, or Sao Paulo, Brazil. Game 1, which means they lose a home game, but they play in Brazil. And I'm thinking, how many Eagle fans will make that trek to Brazil? Probably a lot, right? Eagle fans in Brazil, how do you think that's going to work out, Darren?
The Eagles are a really good traveling fan base, but this isn't. It's not as easy to get to Brazil as it is Miami. I mean,
Philly
sports about country.
Philly sports trips will probably have the Brazil trip.
Oh,
for
of course
Eagle fans. Eagle fans let loose in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Of course they will, and that's not like, there's a little danger going down to Brazil. It's a bit of a hint of danger.
They'll be going walking down the street, una cerveza, not knowing that the language isn't Spanish in Brazil, it's Portuguese.
Oh, there will be records set for Americans arrested in Brazilian jail. Records.
You might not get out of those Brazilian jails. You better watch yourself out there. Yeah. All right. So Sao Paulo will be covering the Eagles in Sao Paulo, Brazil, which is like tremendous. All right, there you go. That's the Eagles. Well, today we have a special guest on the Mike Missanelli podcast. I mean, this guy and I go back a long way as a colleague, also as an opponent, up against each other. And, of course, he is the great Jon Marks joining us today. Johnny, how you doing?
And I go all the way back to the morning sports page with you.
Yeah, yes, you do.
And the great sports debate and MG Missanelli with the Inquirer. I've been a long time admiring of you, Mike.
These are great. People love these stories because when they trace our history, I know when I've had Angelo on, they love us going back in time and how this whole thing transpired. But first of all, let me ask you, how is retirement?
It's lonely, Mike. It's lonely. Unfortunately, I don't have the benefits of retirement or unemployment benefits. I just I have actually just got my last check from Odyssey, which was the bonus for last quarter. So I'm officially not making any more money from Odyssey. So things have been great until now, where come next Friday, there's no direct deposit coming in my account.
Yeah, I've felt that in various stages of my life. So well, you'll get through it, and I'm sure. Listen, I don't think that this is going to be the end for you in this business, but so people really would love to know what went into this decision, because a lot of people don't understand it, especially people that are in the media. They go, how do you give up a cushy job like that where you're on top of the world and everybody aspires to get to that point and you just walk away from it? So from your perspective, what went into the decision?
Mike, I'm a simple man, and it just had gotten to a point where I was unhappy, not necessarily with the job, but my quality of life. I live in Collegeville. I'm driving anywhere from 2 to 2.5 hours a day to get to work, not getting home. You work afternoon drive for virtually your entire career, so you're good with the hours. Your daughter was older. But
I was 5 minutes from the station. So.
Right. Yeah. You went down City Line Avenue and you were at home. Right. So, man, like it got to a point where my last contract negotiation and kind of where they came in, I was just like, man, like I'm not like I can make this money doing something else with a better quality of life. And I was compensated well. I just had my best financial year last year. It was the best I've done professionally and financially. And to walk away from it is, I think, difficult for people to understand. Like, how can you do that? You're talking about sports. I don't know. I just felt like doing something different. And it was a quality of life issue. It really was. I just wasn't happy. I miss seeing my kids. Like my kids are now old enough to where they're playing sports year round, and I can see them all the weekends, and that's fine. But basketball right now, missing practice, missing games. Softball, missing practice, missing games, missing dinner every night. My daughter's 2. My youngest is 2. She's just now she was asleep every night before I came home from work. She was in bed at 7:00 every night. I just feel like. Could I have done it another year? Yeah, I could have done it another year, maybe another 2 years. But when looked at, the show deserved a long-term commitment from me, and I just couldn't do it. So, I mean,
well, you know what? It's really noble that went into the decision, and people can't question that at all. But were you at any point getting tired of talking about sports?
Yes, of course. You know this. We've had these conversations. We're both sports fans, right? We're all sports fans. Talking about it for 20 hours a week, and then I'm doing a weekend show on CBS Sports Radio. So I'm doing 24 hours of sports talk a week. I'm not pouring concrete. I'm not working up on a roof, but you almost get in a mode where you're going through the motions. You have the Eagle season, and then the Eagle season's over, and then you have the Super Bowl, and then you head into the draft, and then you have spring training, and then you have the dog days of summer where you're waiting for the Eagle season to start again, and it becomes almost robotic. So as much of a sports fan as I am, yeah, you kind of get bored, and it's a grind, man. You did this longer than I have. Doing sports radio 5 days a week is a grind, and frankly, it's nice not doing it right now.
Yeah, you're right about that. The thing that kept me going was the interaction with callers. As you know, I used to take great joy in messing with callers, and that kept me not bored. Like the sports part of it did get tedious after a while because you don't care as much anymore about the result. It takes a lot of years to get to that point. But I missed that interaction of arguing with people. That's the thing that I most missed about it. And I'm wondering if you're going to go through that.
I'm going through it right now. There's things you miss about the job. I miss going into the studio, despite the travel. I miss actually going into the studio. You miss working with the guys. You miss seeing them every day. I miss Ike. I miss Jack. And I miss the interaction, especially when there's that you go in, Mike, and it's like, this is going to be a good day. There's stuff to talk about today. I'm going to piss people off today with what I say. I'm going to mess it. Like those days, those are the days that you miss because you're going to come in and you're going to have fun. And they're the days you miss. And I more than anything, I miss the interaction with the audience. For sure.
And let me give you a recent example of that. The Eagles collapsed and the way Sirianni handled it, I was itching to get on the air to talk about that and mess that whole situation up. Those are the days that are the hardest when something like that happens, when you're going to have a visceral reaction to it.
Yeah, I was happy that I didn't have to deal with that. I think it was too fresh to where I was so exhausted with the Eagles season. I was actually glad that I didn't have to deal with the end of that season. But to your point, the big stories that happen, people for decades with you, Mike, they turn to you because they want to know what you have to say about what happened in Philly sports, and you become accustomed to it. And when you don't have that anymore, now it's like, well, who's listening to you? And you have your podcast, and I'm doing stuff on YouTube now. But it's different. It's different because they knew at 2:00 every day they could turn on 97.5 The Fanatic, or they could turn on WIP, and they're going to hear what we have to say about it.
All right, let's go back in time a little bit because this is how we first crossed paths. Now, WPEN here, I was working in New York at the time.
10:50.
And I was working the show with Stephen A. Smith up in New York. After that thing happened at WIP, where I kind of lost my job for a couple of years, and I'm trying to resuscitate my career, so I go up to New York. And you appear at Shea Stadium with Meredith Marakovitz, because I bet WPEN had just started doing sports talk radio. Is that the way it worked?
October of 2005, they flipped from oldies to sports talk, and I joined right around the beginning of time there. So this is
you're producing the morning show.
Correct.
All right. So I'm at Shea Stadium. I guess they're playing the Phillies. That's why you were there. And you introduced yourself to me with Meredith Marakovitz. And from that point on, you kept me viable in Philly by having me as a guest on that show. I'm commuting to New York every day. I remember talking to you guys most of the time from the 30th Street Station
on the
before
train.
I got on the train.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I mean, like, so I booked you, and I was producing the morning show, and you have to realize at the time, before Mike came to 950, there was very few people that listened to the station. Jody was on 3 to 7. They had national morning shows, and I forget, we had a local morning show, but for the most part, the station wasn't viable. So I was looking for anything. I was looking for any good guest. I was looking to make my place in the business. And I was also trying to get you to the station. And Matt Nahagian, who became the program director in 2006 or 2007, first call I had with him, and I said, Mike Missanelli is the only person you can hire. He's the only person that can do anything for this station. There's nobody else in the market. And Matt realized that, and he went after you for a while. But part of bringing you on the show was to try to get you back to Philly, because I realized you were the ticket to making the station. I thought we were going to go to Spanish sports or something like that. I couldn't believe the station survived. Thank God you were, because I remember the year before, I thought you were coming and it didn't happen. And I was disappointed. But then in April in 2008, I remember they pulled some people, the midday show at the time, they pulled them in the office and they let them go. And it's like, and Matt looked at me and said, don't worry, good things are happening. And I said, oh my God, it's Missanelli. And I think I texted you and I said, no, is this happening? And you were coy in your response, but I knew it.
Yeah, I do remember. So let me get this straight. So you were listening to us growing up, because
yes.
there was stage one of Sports Talk Radio, which started in 1990 with Angelo going over. Then we all came over, and that was Sports Talk Radio. Did that influence you?
Yes, absolutely. So
my show with Steve was an influence to you?
So I was on. They do a show on Fox. Jason Martinez, not Martinez. Jason Martinez and Breland. They do a show on Fox at 11:30 at night, and they throw these questions at you at the end of the show. And he's like, favorite WIP show, and I'm like, oh, Steve and Mike. And knowing that he's like, oh, okay, like didn't know who it was, but that was the perfect show. That was a great show, the Steve and Mike show. I have a keychain upstairs. I got to go get it. I have a Steve and Mike keychain.
Oh my God, upstairs. That's a relic.
So I remember Morning Sports Page, where you used to come on at 9:00. Brookie would leave at 9. You would come on. I think Sal would come on. Stark would come on. Al would come on. Mac
we would all come on for an hour, because Brookshire did not want to do 4 hours.
Right.
So he wanted that last hour off, and he just tossed it to us.
Well, I wanted him off too, because you guys were much better coming on at 9:00. But that was really between that and the Great Sports Debate. That was all happening at the same time, right? And then you guys were appearing on the Great Sports Debate.
Yeah.
You were wearing the members only jacket on the Great Sports Debate, looking fly.
I dressed well on that show, man. I put those guys to shame. I used to get my clothes at Ira Lish, which was like on North Fifth Street, where the first WIP studio was.
You pulled it off.
But anyway, so I come down here, and I didn't really know anything about the station. It was good to be back in Philly and resuscitate my whole career back in Philly, because it was obviously my roots. And I stepped into the studio, and it was like a little box studio. You were in the control room, and it was kind of nicer, but there was a window that was askew. So I could barely see you as my producer. And I'm going, what in the hell have I done with this station?
And your studio was horrendous. It was
a
like
box.
From the 60s.
It was literally a box. It was like a prison.
And Jody would sometimes leave his dentures on the one spot in the studio before you. A couple times.
Jody wasn't happy that I came.
Well, listen.
Jody was like, I had nothing to do. They said do evening drive. Okay. I didn't know I was displacing Jody. He moved to midday. Jody didn't talk to me for like a year.
Well, listen. But to your point, the studios were terrible. The station, I was thinking about this today because we started April. It wasn't an April Fool's joke. We started April 1st, right? That was your first day. And
Yeah.
And what people need to know about that about 9:50, the signal was terrible. So
Yeah.
I didn't really learn that until later. It was probably October when you turned the clocks back and it got darker earlier. And we had people calling being like, I can't get the station. There's something wrong with your station. There's something wrong with your station. What I didn't know at the time was when it got dark, they had to power the station down. So people that were listening to us for 6 months now on the same drive home lost us like when they went over the Walt Whitman Bridge and couldn't hear the show. So not only were we on a station that nobody listened to before, now we lost our signal like half of our audience. Mike, it's a miracle, and it's probably the biggest accomplishment in Philadelphia radio history that you were able to beat WIP in a year on that crappy signal like we did. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, we got the number one slot in a year, I remember I was celebrating, popping champagne, and all that stuff. The station then grew, and we were the first station to go FM. So it was a big deal. And then we really caught a lot of momentum. And so you're the producer of this show. And so what stands out to you about the show? You were the guy who booked Skip Bayless, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you booked Skip Bayless, and you know that I'm fired up about what he said about Philadelphia. And so basically you're telling him to come on as a guest, and he's not expecting the avalanche that's going to come his way, right?
Correct. I don't know if I expected. Do you remember what he said when he came on? You were talking about trading for Anquan Bolden, or a caller was saying to trade for Anquan Bolden. So you bring on Skip, and Skip goes, "Oh, I'd trade for Anquan Bolden too." And you go, "Yeah, Skip, we'll get to that in a second." And then you just tore into him. And he just woke up from a nap too. That was the other thing. Like he set his alarm, he was sleeping, and then he probably set it 5 minutes before I called him, or we woke him up when we called him, and then you're waiting on the other end of the phone.
When you had to stay in character to be polite to him to come on the show, and it's going to be a nice interview, and I'm just sharpening the knives because that guy pissed me off to the point where I was just livid about it, that he had these old stereotypes of Philadelphia fans, and I just lit into them. And there comes the famous "Google me." It comes out of that interview.
It'll live forever.
He goes,
yeah.
I don't even know who you are. Who are you? And I go, it doesn't matter who I am. Google me. That became the soundbite for the ages.
He at the time it was still cold pizza. It wasn't even first take. So he was on. I remember you saying like, "You can bring me on with the 2 live stews."
Yeah.
And he goes, and he said, "You are not worthy of coming on my show."
Yeah, he did. It was great. I loved the contention. I actually was livid about it, and he didn't expect it to happen. But yeah, I mean that lives in infamy, I guess, in Philadelphia talk, because that soundbite was played forever.
Well, and he was talking about it was a Dallas Philly thing, and like they were like, I forget what it was. There was like Dallas travel groups that were saying don't go to Philadelphia because you're and he was saying that people are scared for their life and everything else.
Yeah, he had some kind of story about how he was treated at Veterans Stadium in like 1985 or whatever it was. So in any event, one of the things I started to do was to bring producers in as feedback, and I did that with you because you were good at that, and it's funny because all my producers leave me for greater heights, but I wanted to do that with producers. It was like I was raised where the producer didn't say anything, and Darren, who produces the show, can attest to that. Working under Bigby, producers were like, forgotten it, just push buttons and don't do anything. But I needed the feedback because I a lot of time used you as a foil, and I was tough on you, and so have at it now. This is your chance to get back at me for being tough on you all those years.
No, I mean I had said this recently on my YouTube show, which is every Monday through Friday at 9 p.m. You can subscribe at Jon Marks Media. That's the handle, also on Instagram and Twitter. But I talked about this last week. We were talking about it last week. I said I got to have Mike on the show, and people were saying, "Yeah, bring Mike on." But working with you, playing off of you was the easiest job that I've ever had in broadcasting. Dealing with everything else with you, I'm not going to tell you is the easiest job in broadcasting. But on the air for 4 hours, I feel like that, and I don't want to take anything away from what Ike and I did and Jack did, because we had a great amount of success and I love the show. But it kind of where I was in the career and like not knowing any better and just being like, it was the most fun I had knowing like, F them, we're gonna beat them. I remember when when Glenn Macnow did some podcast and they asked him about there's 2 sports radio stations in Philadelphia. And he goes, I don't think that there are 2 sports radio stations in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And we used that cut over and over and over again on the air. And he got so mad. He called in one day. What did you call Mr. Smug? You go, let's hear from Mr. Smug.
Mr. Smug, I used to call him.
The ratings are in. Let's hear from Mr. Smug. Yeah. And I would play. I don't think that there are 2 sports radio stations.
Yeah, he was on his high and mighty horse that WPM was never going to compete with WIP.
So he calls in on the regular line, and I'm trying to trick him to get him on the air with you without him knowing it. So, because he's being like, he's killing me. Why is he killing me? I'm like, hang on a second. I'll get him for you. And then he hung up when we tried to get him on the air. But like I worked with you for 4 years. You don't mind being the bad guy a lot of times. You know exactly what you're doing as far as setting other people up. And you, like I said, on the air for 4 hours every day, I knew that we created gold. You did it with Jason.
It was a really fun show. And because we created gold, you get poached, and all of a sudden you get your own show. Now, was the transition, was that the Brace transition? Because you then had several capacities at the station.
I went to nights. I went to nights for a couple of months, and then Tony and Harry, like Tony was being Tony, so they were like, all right, we got to try to make a move. So they brought me on. I worked 2 hours with Tony and 2 hours with Baldy, which you can imagine. Forget about I like both of those guys. Working 2 separate shows for 2 hours each sucked. All right, so I did that for a year.
I don't even remember that. They split the show into two hour segments.
Harry used to do 2 hours with Tony and 2 hours with Baldy. Oh, and then they moved Harry to nights, and then I worked 2 hours with, I think it was Tony first and then Baldy. So I did that. And then after a year of that, that's when I did Sean Brace. And again, that was only a 2 hour show, which is like you get on the air and you're pretty much off the air after 2 hours. So I worked with Sean for a couple of years after that.
Yeah, you worked with Sean. And then did you work with Anthony when he came?
I worked with Anthony for 18 months.
In the morning, right?
Yes, in mornings, yes. So the original morning show when Anthony came over was MCW, Jamie Lynch, me, and the Cuz.
Okay, all right. Now, but then you make the bold move to leave the station, and I'm going, oh my God, what a traitor! He goes over to the enemy that we beat. Now, what went into that decision? Because you went there to do nights, right?
Yeah, I went there to do nights, and honestly, I went there, and I remember you saying to me, I'm here, because after I told them I was leaving, I was still on the air, like it wasn't public knowledge until Mercedes leaked it to Crossing Broad, and then they got rid of me pretty much right away. But I remember you saying, like, you sure you really want to go over there? Because at the time, they were coming off of Andy Bloom, and like WIP wasn't a great place to work, and Spike had just taken over. I mean, honestly, it like I felt like that I had hit I plateaued at the Fanatic, and like where did I go from there? I was working with Anthony. It was his show. I was the number 2 mic, but it was his show, and it's like I just wanted more, and I felt like that unless I gave myself another challenge, that I was just kind of sit there, and I was well liked by everybody. I knew everybody in the company. I'd worked there for 12 years. And I felt like that if I didn't challenge myself and try to do something different, that I was just kind of always going to be there and like make money and, have a good life or whatever. But is that what I wanted out of my broadcasting career? And it wasn't.
Well, you made the right move, obviously, because you became a big star over there. You brought up Andy Bloom, and that's an interesting name because he was a program director that was kind of hated. And he would, he of course was behind the DeBella Stern thing way back in the day. So he had that old radio mindset to destroy the other. And so he didn't give us much respect. So I remember when we beat them in that year, I did probably like one of the most obnoxious things ever. I sent them a funeral wreath. A stand-up funeral wreath. So, and it came in. I remember Natalie Eganoff said she was the receptionist there, and the thing came in. It was like our sympathies. So yeah, that was.
And he went berserk.
Yeah,
didn't he? Wasn't he emailing you threats and stuff?
Yeah. Andy Bloom started emailing me threats. It was all about asking. We took him out. He's the guy that we took out. All right. So, how do you feel about the state of sports talk radio today? Because I think there've been two stages, and the stage that we created way back in the day has kind of changed. And now I think it's more fan oriented. Like WIP, they get an eagle in every show, which guarantees acceptance from the people. You put an eagle on the air, that guarantees acceptance. And I think the industry has changed more to being a fan than being more analytical. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look at all the first generation of WIP. All of you guys were respected journalists, right? Glenn, you, Angelo. Now with this kind of new wave, we don't have that, right? Like I started out in radio. I've been in radio. I can barely write at all, right? So you look at everybody that's there. The camera's a radio guy. Joe Giglio's a radio guy. He's wrote a little bit, but like we came up as radio people. It's interesting because people always ask like, well, do you guys make up your takes, or like, do you believe everything you say? And like, Of course you don't, right? Like you're just like with First Take and just like with all those different shows. Like there's days where you are taking like you always used to say, oh, I'm going to play devil's advocate on this. Like it's your place to play a certain side of things, right? So you almost make yourself believe these things. But by the time I was done working at WIP, I didn't even know what I believed or what I said or whatever. Like you're just trying to get through the days and just trying to get through the weeks. But like man, like what WIP became such a monster, and when I left the Fanatic, it was pretty close, right? Like you were obviously winning your day part. Anthony went down a little bit since initially challenging Angelo, but I think the best thing that WIP does is they utilize the Eagles and the Phillies to their utmost advantage. They're almost impossible to beat just having those two franchises.
Yeah, they're the teams that run the whole thing. So if you have the rights to that, you're always going to have an edge. So yeah, I agree with that. But the days I see producers like you went through a lot of hoops to get to where you are, and you a lot of years spent just like all of us in newspapers to get the shot on radio. We had to go through that newspaper route. Now, kids come in and they produce and they want to get on the air right away, and most of the time they do.
Yeah, it's on, and I feel responsible for creating that, and I guess I have to blame you as well, since you kind of set the template for me and the Martinez and Sean. We forget Sean Brace was your producer too.
Sean was my producer after you, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because you had.
And then he went to Nights for a while.
And then Jason, and then he took a show with Harry. So like I've had to replace producers the whole time there. But I always thought like Stern made that popular with the Baba Booey, right? He would use Baba Booey as a foil, and so a producer of the show. So I kind of thought that's how it should be, because we're not talking strictly about sports. We're talking about life issues, right. and arguments that go back and forth are entertaining to listen to. That's the way I always looked at it.
Yeah, and I grew up as a huge Stern fan, and you could definitely tell the influence in how you saw how a show should be done. And yeah, but you're right. It's not just the producer on a main day part that's talking anymore. If you tune in to WIP on a weekend, you hear the producer chatting on the air, which is somewhat surprising, I guess, at some point. But it's like, I guess it's kind of where it is right now.
Yeah. Listen, man, I got to ask you this question because you're laying low now. You'll probably get the itch to come back. I mean, I don't know where these months will take you. Maybe some great opportunity to come your way, and you'll forget all about this industry. I'm sure a lot of people, would you come back to Sports Talk Radio in this town?
Yeah, sure. There's only one other station. Obviously, it would have to be something that I feel like would work, and that I would enjoy. I'm not going back to a show that I feel like I'd be like, nah, I'd be miserable doing that, or no, I don't want to work with. No, like it would have to be something that would make a lot of sense. I'm also right now not desperate for money too, Mike. So in a year, we'll see where we stand with everything. But like right now, I mean, I feel like that. I feel like that I've jumped into the deep end, and now I have to figure out a way to get out and swim. And there's real desperation that is going to be there to do it. And we'll see where it takes me. There's a lot of opportunity out there.
Yeah. It took a lot of balls to do what you did, but it also took a lot of balls to talk about it afterwards. And you talked about it afterwards. I held my tongue for the most part when that situation at the Fanatic happened with me, because I always thought just take the high road on this. And I took every ounce of strength that I had, not to say what was really on my mind about that whole situation. But you came out with guns blazing, and you talked about how the company was bankrupt, and all of a sudden it splashed around Crossing Broad, and they come back and take you off the air at CBS Radio. Do you regret doing that, or you just thought that was part of what you should do?
I don't regret it. No. Yeah. I mean, if you listen to and Mike, I'm guilty of this as a radio host, so I can't be mad when it gets done to me. But oftentimes we look at headlines of things and we don't actually pay attention to the context of what's said, and we use it because that's what you did. If you actually listen to what I said on the Crossing Broad podcast, I was explaining why they don't pay individuals on the radio like they once did. And it's because the company was in financial problems. And I guess when you're still working for a company technically, and they're allowing you to work on a national network, you shouldn't be talking about their financials. But they did end up declaring for bankruptcy the following week after I said that. And by the way, right now their stock price, I think, is 6 cents a share. So, So, I mean, and by the way, like,
yeah, I don't think they appreciated you announcing that they were in trouble. I think they
did not. They did not. No, and like I had said, I mean, should I have not said it? I shouldn't be surprised at the reaction that it got from the company. So I'm not blaming them for anything.
No, you were honest. Listen, I admire. My whole career has been based on honesty and saying what I felt. It was on my head, and you did that. And I think it's a courageous thing to do, and you obviously kind of knew what the ramifications would be. This is the last question I have to ask you, because it's always been I've always been curious about it. I went out like suddenly, like I announced 2 hours into a show that I was leaving, and and I wanted to do it that way. I had known about some stuff, and I said, this is going to be my last day. And they didn't really know what I was going to do. And I announced I'm done. I'm out. And what was your reaction when you heard that? You were on the air, obviously.
I was disappointed. I felt like the audience deserved better. I felt like your audience deserved better. And then when I had to announce that I was leaving, I wish I would have done what you did, because it's not easy. It was difficult because you don't know what to do. You don't know what to say. You don't know exactly how to put it, if people are going to take you out of context or take you the wrong way. I mean, it's just the easiest thing would have been to say that, all right, I'm done. This is my last day. I'm done at 6:00. Thanks for everything. See you. Instead, and believe me, Mike, they knew this was coming. I knew this was coming. We decided that we would give it a couple days, and that was it. I wasn't announcing it. I didn't want an award tour. I didn't want to. That's the last thing I wanted. I would have loved to just say I'm done. See you. But everybody involved felt like the audience deserved kind of a proper send off, a proper goodbye, and that's I felt like your audience deserved more than 2 hours.
Well, thank you. And here's the footnote to that. Your first book after I left you gained 13 points.
Well, Mike, if you look at the ratings between when you were there and when you stopped working the shift, I think it's pretty clear. You could tell when you stopped working if you looked at the numbers. No, at risk of alienating another radio company here, Mike, I don't think that they realized how much of a loss that was when you stopped working at the Fanatic.
Well, here's what they didn't realize. They didn't realize It's a music company, and they play music. And when you don't have the same association, you have to realize that in Sports Talk Radio, a host builds a bond with an audience. And I don't think that they looked at it like it was just the music station and they could just roll on with anybody. That's the mistake I think they made.
Well, I know a lot of longtime listeners to your show that I knew from when I worked with you and when I was at the station. I noticed they started to get on the phone lines, or I talked to a lot of people afterwards that said, really started to listen to you guys after Mike left, and I love your show or whatever. So you exiting 2 to 6 certainly helped my career.
Yeah, well, listen, you had forged ahead anyway, so it didn't matter. But the extent of the number shift was funny to me. And I go, if you're a radio professional, how do you not anticipate that? Like, I'm trying to step outside my body and go, come on. But anyway, let's not get involved in that. Listen, man, it's great talking to you. Best of luck with the family. And, I was at your wedding, so your wife is a lovely person. I don't think I've ever met your children.
No, you did, actually.
I did meet your children? You
were doing it must have been an NCAA the March Madness remote at the Hooters in King of Prussia. Because I had Gianna in her, she was only 4 months old. I had her in the chair, and it was right after I left, actually. So she was young, and I kind of came through and I said hi to you, but that's the only time. And that was the last time.
Yeah, well, you were busy. You have 3 children since I last saw you. That's good work by you, bro.
Yeah, it's just I reset the clock. I'll be 62 when my final daughter graduates from college, or from high school. Awesome.
3 daughters, right?
3 daughters, 8, 6, and 2. And every day is the pickup line at school. So at about 3:00 today, I'll be venturing to the pickup line to get them. 3
daughters, 3 weddings. I just had my daughter got married this summer.
I saw. So, congratulations.
Collect, save your pennies, brother. That's all I can tell you. All right, man. Listen, good talking to you. Thanks, Jon. Jon Marks, the great Jon Marks, joining us on the Mike Missanelli podcast. We'll talk. All right, that's going to do it for the Mike Missanelli podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. It was a crazy show. Thanks to Jon Marks for joining the show. Thanks to BetRivers for my bet last night where I took the Dallas Mavericks on the money line and cashed in very easily. And have a great rest of the week. And I guess we'll talk to you with the Super Bowl coming up. We'll have our special Super Bowl show coming up at the end of the week, right?
Yeah, we'll do some prop bets. We'll give our picks.
I'm not even sure who I like in this game yet. I got to zero in. So stay tuned for that podcast later in the week. For Darren and for Jon Marks, who joined us today, I'm Mike Missanelli. Tell your friends and neighbors. You can get in touch with me at mike@mikemiss.com and on Twitter, MikeMiss25. Have a great night, everybody. We'll talk to you. Bye-bye.